Hey guys, Anthony Jones here with Brigade Boats. In today's video, I'm going to show you how we take this Lowe 17-foot aluminum bass boat and turn it from half built to full tilt with a complete overhaul, inside, outside, and on the trailer. I'm going to show you the entire build process step by step, so stick around. The project is a Lowe 170 aluminum bass boat. She is a 17-footer and the shape of the hull is absolutely gorgeous. I called the boat half built because the owner had gutted and partially reassembled the interior as well as stripped the majority of the exterior paint. It was at this moment that he decided to turn the boat over to me to do a full build. The plan was to re-gut the boat, change the layout, add framing, decking, lids, livewell, full electronics, hydroturf, paint, and restore the trailer. The customer gave me almost full creative liberty on this project to turn the boat into a tournament bass boat designed specifically for electric-only waters. Here in Georgia, we have many electric-only lakes and reservoirs, and bass tournament trails on these waters are becoming more popular than ever. My customer is an avid fisherman on these tournament trails, and this boat would be purpose-built just for that. This video documents the entire build process from start to finish. I'll walk you through what I did and how I did it in the order I did it in. There's a full parts list in the video description for anyone interested in any of the parts I used in this build. For any purchases made on tinyboatnation.net, use the code BRIGADE and save 5% off your order at checkout. Get comfy, get your popcorn, get your cold drinks ready. This is a long one. I have more hours in this boat than any project before, but stick around until the end. You will not be disappointed. And guys, we are on the road to 50K, so if you want to help us out, join the channel. If you enjoyed the content, hit that subscribe button. I would greatly appreciate it. I am super excited to announce that I am teaming up with the folks at 6 Cents Fishing. To me, this is a dream opportunity because I've actually been purchasing 6 Cents Fishing products for years now, before my channel was even a thing. To celebrate this partnership, 6 Cents Fishing has given me a discount code for you all to use. So do me a favor, next time you're on 6centsfishing.com, use the code BRIGADE at checkout to save 10% off your order. By using the code BRIGADE at 6 Cents Fishing, it really helps support the channel and allows me to continue doing what I'm doing in these videos. So remember, it doesn't matter if it's $10,000 in product or a $10 lure. Save 10% with the code BRIGADE. Without further ado, let's get started on the build. With the help of my good neighbors, we flipped the boat off the trailer. I then began stripping old paint off the bottom of the boat with my angle grinder equipped with the wire wheel. I also went over the sides of the boat as well. After the wire wheel treatment, I hit the entire exterior of the boat with an orbital sander and 180 grit to smooth everything out. I got to work on the transom repairing years of dents and dings with fiberglass reinforced filler. I'd add filler, sand, add filler, block sand, repeat the process until the transom was nice and smooth. This was purely cosmetic as I wanted the boat hull to look show quality once paint was applied. Speaking of which, with the bottom prepped and cleaned, it was now time for bottom paint. We'll call the paint a little shop secret, but this is actually an industrial paint that I've recently been experimenting with. I did 3 coats and this stuff levels out quite nicely. Because I wanted the bottom of the boat to contrast the sides and give a mean look with final paint, I decided on black. Now with the boat off the trailer and the bottom paint curing, it was time to work on the trailer. It would get new paint, new bunks, and new fenders. I started by removing the old fenders, then sanding and prepping the trailer for paint. It would then get a few coats of gloss black paint that I rolled on with a foam zippy roller. I then turned my attention to replacing the trailer bunks. For this portion of the project, I won't go into great detail because I actually did a step-by-step video documenting how I made my mo better than factory waterproof trailer bunks. The video is up on my channel and I'll link it above. It currently has over 50,000 views, so it seems that people are finding it of use. If you're interested, check it out. There were 2 through-hole fittings that I ended up removing and filling by backing the holes with 090 sheet aluminum held with rivets and 5200. These would later be filled with fiberglass and sanded smooth before paint. It was now time to strip and gut. I did body work on the bow, shaping it smooth before adding primer. I had a vision of what I wanted to do up here, but for it to turn out correct, the bow needed to be flat. No humps or bumps, or they would show in the final details. I ended up removing front factory framing, rear factory framing where a livewell was, and I also removed all the console framing and the rod locker. But I wasn't finished gutting yet. In a game time decision, we decided to gut all the factory pour foam from the rear deck. We found it was holding moisture, and the only way to know if it's holding a few pounds or a few hundred pounds of water is to take it all out. Because this will be an electric-only tournament boat, every mile per hour of top speed counts, and dead weight can be your enemy. By removing the water-saturated foam in this boat, we save well over 100 pounds. Yes, the foam is initially put there for buoyancy if your boat takes on water, but if that old foam begins to hold water, it's actually doing more damage than good. If it's water soaked, it will not add buoyancy. It will add weight, and eventually the water soaked foam will begin to corrode and pit the aluminum, which can lead to holes in the bottom of your boat, which this boat actually showed signs of pitting. Luckily, there was no damage done, but based on what I saw on the back, made me reevaluate the cockpit floor. I'd need to gut it and check it out. Now you can see how easily you can get sucked down the rabbit hole in a boat restoration. And now with the floor out, I checked for leaks or damage. I found angled aluminum floor ledgers that would need to be reattached properly. I grinded smooth a lot of high spots and raised rivets on the ribs to ensure that the floor would go back in nice and flush. I then doubled up on foam with 1-inch pink foam base and 1/2-inch Polypro glued on top to level out with the 1.5-inch ribs. This would give the aluminum floor more structural support while also increasing the boat's flotation a tad, as well as adding some sound dampening for the cockpit. Quick note guys, on the pink foam base, I did loose cut it shy of the ribs to give trapped water natural drainage paths to the hole channels. With the floor back in, I reattached it to the ribs using 3/16-inch countersink rivets. I then pulled a hat trick by using the third foam manufacturer in this project by covering all the walls in 1-inch greenboard foam. Supply chains were jacked up during this build, so I was forced to get whatever I could get, wherever I could get it. I was able to recycle a front deck vertical wall, side panels, and the rod box, so those parts went back in the boat. On the interior walls of the back hatch, I skim coated the imperfections with body filler and then sanded smooth. I wanted the back hatch to be absolutely seamless and show no signs of previous framing or the original livewell. Meanwhile, I did a patch job where there was a trouble spot in the factory floor. This patch was then glassed over and sanded smooth like it never happened. And remember those through-hole fittings through the side of the boat in the rear transom? I did the same process there, sanded smooth like they were never there. Again, I was recycling the factory rod box, but after reinstalling, I noticed that it didn't plane out properly with the back deck. So I pulled it back out, cut a bit off the bottom, and reinstalled it, ensuring it planed with the back deck and was square within the cockpit. Once installed, I then had to trim the rod box framing to allow clearance for the new lid to fit. I actually had to do the same thing on the vertical wall so the new livewell would fit. Meanwhile, on the side panel where the console used to be, I had to do a patch job to flush everything out, given we would no longer have a throttle in that area. I began prepping the new livewell location by adding foam insulation board wherever possible. This would help insulate and keep the water temps in check for those hot Georgia summers. I then began framing the surround for the livewell tub. The livewell and all the livewell plumbing parts are from tbnation.net, again linked in the video description. We use the Flow-Rite Premium Kit in this build, and they have that available on the website. Flow-Rite's livewell plumbing parts and quick lock system has been a game changer. I've really enjoyed using their parts in some of my recent builds. Not to mention that the folks at Flow-Rite have been super supportive of what I'm doing on the channel and with my builds. If you're doing a livewell, I would strongly recommend checking out Flow-Rite. With the livewell in, it was time to take it to the lake and give her a test run. This setup is unique and the first time I've done it this way. The livewell and the livewell pump are up front, the fill hose is through the transom. This setup relies on the fill hose to backfill with water from the transom to the livewell pump. From there, the pump then pumps the water into the livewell and the system pressurizes. For this to work, I had to keep the fill hose level and low, and it had to run below the water line of the boat, otherwise it would not backfill with water. I was ecstatic when everything worked out as it should. Obviously, there's a lot of details to cover to this, which could make for a lengthy video in itself. I did film this install in great detail and will hopefully have a video on it in the future. With the boat back in the shop, I began framing in front of the livewell. This area will be one of the more detailed parts of the build. I started by creating a frame for the floor of the hatch. This floor was raised above the livewell equipment. I then boxed in all the sides and the floor using sheet aluminum. I left the center floor section open for livewell pump access. I then came back in with a flush mounted hinge door for the center section. Essentially, I was creating a hatch within a hatch. The customer could store a bunch of tackle in here, but also have easy access to the livewell pump if ever needed. Eventually, this area will get tricked out in hydroturf and carbon fiber to resemble something out of the Fast and the Furious, but more on that later. I then worked forward, framing in the small front hatch section before moving back to the cockpit to frame the deck extension. I started by adding an angled aluminum ledger that I would actually frame out and down off of this point. The area I'm framing in for the deck extension is where the original steering console was. We'd add 2 new hatches here, one for electronics and one for storage. I'd also add a third hatch that would be lower than the deck height to act as a step. This is where 3 lithium batteries would go. I'd frame from the side and work to the center. Because I haven't started welding just yet, all of the aluminum is 1/16 and riveted together. Riveting together is DIY friendly, but in this boat, I'd say the framing is pretty complex. I wanted to mirror the shape of the rod locker on the other side, so the deck would have to come to a point. The framing would kill into the side panel, which is also a vertical angle. The cockpit floor runs downhill to center on an angle, so I wouldn't be framing off a flat floor. Add in that the framing tops needed to be furred or planed properly to account for lid and deck mounting. It was definitely a challenge. With the additional hatches framed, I worked in the center to begin framing in the deck step. This step will pull double duty. It would be an easy way up to the tall front deck, but also be a perfect home for 3 low-profile 12-volt lithium batteries. The batteries we are using are from Amped Outdoors. The customer provided these up front so I could use them to mock up the design. 2 batteries would supply power to the Garmin trolling motor I would install later, while 1 would be dedicated to the electronics. I got started on cutting the side panels for all of the framing that I added. As you can see, I templated out all of these awkward shapes using cardboard, then tracing the template onto 060 sheet aluminum, and finally cutting out with a circular saw. The templating takes a lot of time and patience up front, but given all of the angles within this cockpit, it's well worth the time to ensure jam-up jelly tight fitment on all of the panels added. Meanwhile, off camera, I framed out cockpit side steps. These would make it easier to get in and out of the boat from the cockpit, but also provide cover for the livewell fill hose as well as other wiring that had yet to come. From a design standpoint, I like the added depth and detail that these steps give to the cockpit area, especially after the hydroturf installation later on in the build. Speak of the devil, I hopped in the back mega hatch and installed the hydroturf. This is cut to fit sheet material, and I do my best to keep the line straight and centered. Hydroturf is not cheap, so I measure like 5 times and cut once. The hydroturf in the back hatch will be a great surface to mount the 2 48-volt lithium batteries that will power the electric outboard. I moved from the back to front and 2-piece the front hatch and hydroturf as well. Hydroturf made its way into the hatch within the hatch, making sure the turf lines broke on dead center. That's not all, because off camera, I made the livewell pump access area look like popping the hood on an exotic car. I always say the devil's in the details, and even though this area will never be seen, to me it's still a highlight of this build. Next, I mocked up the mega hatch lid and had to make a frame addition surrounding it so I'd have material to tie my aluminum sheet decking to once I installed it. I began the process of wiring the boat. I started by wiring up all the small LED lights that would mount inside of the hatches. All the lighting in this boat would be red, and I wired all the lights with 16-gauge leads. I pre-wired all the cockpit lights, but these wouldn't be able to be mounted until after the hydroturf was installed. All in all, this boat would get a total of 21 LED lights in it. Definitely the most I've done in a John boat build so far. I mounted up the bilge pump, and then I had to make custom flanges on the back deck. There would need to be small side panels under the gunnels to the back deck. Unfortunately, the customer didn't have the original panels or the mounting points, so I'd need to make my own. By notching some angled aluminum and gently bending it to the angle I needed, I was able to create a proper flange. Once mounted up, I then riveted in newly cut aluminum panels for a clean look. Next, I wired up and temporarily mounted the 6 LED lights that would illuminate the decking. These light strips would eventually mount to the inside flats of the gunnel. I couldn't permanently mount them just yet because they would need to be mounted after final paint. So for now, I just taped them in place. Meanwhile, throughout the boat, all the electrical leads were being fished through to the location of the control panel and the fuse box. I also ran 8-gauge leads from the battery box to the front hatch for a secondary fuse box to be mounted. All leads are ran in marine grade wire and labeled accordingly. I mounted up the lids, which were custom made for this project from TB Nation Outdoors. They're all aluminum, feature anti-flood tracks, and can be powder coated in a variety of colors. They're available on their website. The lids were mounted square and dead center. Lid gaps from lid to lid would need to align and match up perfectly. This all needs to be done because the boat would get hydroturf with lines routed in it. If there's any variance or a lid is misaligned, it's going to show in the final product with lined turf. I cannot stress enough how much time was put into the deck framing and layout to ensure when the turf went down, everything was straight and dead to rights. From here, it was off the final decking. I did a full step-by-step video on this boat showing how I did the aluminum decking, so if you'd like to learn more, check out the video on my channel and linked above. You may remember my crazy Cajun redneck cousin Chris from ATF Hydrographics, Send It John Boats, and now TB Nation Outdoors Southeast. With all the lids and decking in, it was now time to lay down some candy. The hull had already been sanded and prepped beforehand, but we went over it again with Scotch pads and chemically cleaned it. We taped off the trailer, bottom coat, and the interior decking of the boat. We had to risk it for the biscuit on this one and sprayed the boat outside under a carport. Chris owns some awesome spray equipment and a high-end air compressor that is built into his shop, but because he sprays small things for a living, this 17-foot boat and trailer would not fit into his paint booth. We picked a calm day with proper temperatures. The paint flashes incredibly quick, so it was no problem with no wind. It would have been ideal to spray in a booth, but for this project, we didn't have that option. It didn't seem to matter though because the end result was simply stunning. The owner requested to keep the paint info private, but the boat did get a total of 7 coats of paint. 1 coat of silver base, 2 coats of pearl red, 2 coats of candy, and then 2 coats of clear to seal the deal. The boat back from paint, I began to work on something special. This is the part of the build where my creative vision comes to life. I added gator skins around the perimeter of the boat on the gunnels. This is an anti-skid that adds fashion and function, providing some grip and protection on the gunnel flats. Remember earlier in the video when I told you I had a plan for the bow design? Well, this is it. Every piece of gator skins on this boat was measured and cut by hand. On the bow, I laid out my design in blue painter's tape. I wanted the design to be aggressive yet flow with the natural lines of the boat. This portion of the project was fun yet tedious. The design had a lot of angles, so I had to be patient when cutting each individual piece. I really like how this turned out. The textured matte contrast over the gloss candy red just pops. This design detail of the boat just grabs your attention when you look at it and really helps set the boat apart from the rest. Next up, I wrapped the back tray in sheet aluminum to cover up existing cutouts. I then added a plastic cap to easily route cables or fuel lines through. It was time to work on the switch panel. Chris sprayed the recessed panel box the same time we painted the boat. I made detailed measurements of the equipment going in and began cutting from the back side of the box. We go with an 8-gang switch panel and flow-right livewell switches and actuator, spacing everything accordingly. This is the first switch panel box inside of a hatch that I've done on a build. It definitely has its benefits if you have the space in the boat to do it. For now, I just got everything mocked up and in place. I'll come back to this later and do the final wiring. Moving on to the front storage hatch. The customer decided to hit me with a change order. He would now want a seat pedestal base mounted in the lid. There's no spot to put it in the decking, so this was our only option. I took 1/4-inch aluminum plate and cut it for lid backing. I then sprayed it matte black and holes were drilled through the lid and the plate to allow the base to mount up with hardware. And here's a great example of cause and effect. Because the seat base was added on the fly inside of the lid, we now lost our clearance for the center locking latch. To solve this issue, I went with dual offset latches on the lid. All in all, the customer was happy I could make this modification and he's still able to lock his tackle away. After all the mods were done, I went ahead and permanently mounted up the lid with countersink rivets. From there, I went to the back of the boat where the mega hatch lid was and mounted the seat base. The back lid was different because you could see the 1/4-inch plate was welded underneath the lid in advance when the lid was fabricated. Meanwhile, back up front, the holes were drilled in all the lids for locking latches. On the front deck, I had the same issue as I did on the back deck. I had to make my own side panels and mounting brackets. First, I got everything cut out and in place temporarily. From there, I could measure and mock up exactly where the boat buckle retractable rod straps would go. Once the panels were marked, I popped them back out and very carefully cut out the appropriate size square. With everything out and clean, the panels were then reinstalled back in the boat permanently. The boat buckle retractable rod straps are pretty awesome and typically found in bass boats. You have to have enough clearance and room for them to recess. We had just enough room to make these work, and I think that they are another unique detail of the build. I continue to grind my way through the punch list items left on the boat. With the live well now complete, I fully mounted the lid with countersink rivets. On the bow, I cut a custom cover plate for the exposed opening, and then I moved on to the final wiring. If you want to know more about wiring, subscribe to the channel and stick around. I'll have a full updated everything you need to know wiring video coming very soon to my channel. With the wiring now complete, I moved on to installing gas struts on the back mega hatch lid. This will be the only lid in the build that gets struts, and we really only did it here because it was 100% necessary. When installing struts, I checked my mounting point measurements a few times before drilling holes. A miscalculation could result in the strut binding or holes drilled through the lids or the anti-flood tracks in the wrong spot, which obviously wouldn't be good on a finished product. Next up, building a custom battery tray that would hold 3 lithium batteries. Lithium batteries usually have a smaller footprint than traditional lead acid batteries. They're also super light. We would use 3 amped outdoor 60 amp hour batteries, weighing in just at 13 pounds 7 ounces each. That's under 45 pounds for 3 batteries, which is still less than 1 lead acid battery. 2 batteries would power the Garmin trolling motor going on the front, while the 3rd battery will be dedicated to the boat's electronics. While some people may have just crammed the batteries in the step hatch and called it a day, I wanted the batteries to be tight and secure to protect my customer's investment. I started with 3 Group 27 battery trays and trimmed them down to size. I used aluminum and rivets to attach the 3 trays together. Probably overkill, but I even went the extra step to line the inside of the aluminum with scraps of HydroTurf to prevent the battery from rubbing or sliding on the raw aluminum. Once the one-piece unit was built, I then installed it in the step hatch by screwing it down to the floor. Battery straps run underneath it to secure the batteries. After it was installed, I then permanently mounted the step hatch lid. I was super excited to build this battery tray and how it turned out, even though it's never seen. A flashy red paint job and cool HydroTurf are great for photos and video. It's hidden details throughout this build, like the battery tray, that really take the boat to the level of craftsmanship that I want to put out. In the front and back deck, some drain tubes went in. These direct water from the lid tracks through the floor to the hull channels. I also began installing lid edging. This has many purposes, including help keeping lids tight, keeping them from rattling or slamming loudly when closed, as well as protecting the powder-coated finish on the lid tracks. I began pre-wiring the Garmin 93SV. It would get a transom transducer as well as the built-in transducer on the Garmin trolling motor. It was now time for HydroTurf. HydroTurf is the name brand. The material is actually EVA foam. It provides a little cushion, dissipates heat, and is slip resistant. HydroTurf features 3M adhesive backing built in. You simply peel and stick to a properly prepped surface. We purchased a total of 8 rolls of turf for this boat at about $150 a roll. HydroTurf and SeaDeck are the best manufacturers on the market, and they are not cheap. Installing EVA foam is an art. There is a lot of work and thought behind a clean turf install. To make matters more complicated, this boat would have lined turf, which is harder to install than standard colors. With lines routed in, the turf must align and run straight throughout the boat. You also want to prevent lines from landing right beside an edge or a return, or you're left with a tiny sliver of color, which isn't pleasing to the eye. You need to think about breaks and running all the turf grain the same direction to prevent different color sheens. There's a lot to it, guys. I'll have to do a full video in the future. All the decking was cleaned with alcohol. I'd start on the front deck at center and work my way back. I had help from my neighbor lining up the first sheet of turf. Once it was down, I began trimming around the hatch lids. No tricks here besides patience and practice. I use a sharp snap razor knife, and by feel, I cut around the lid gaps. Keeping the knife vertical and with constant pressure are keys to a straight cut. With the snap blades, I'm constantly snapping off or changing the blade altogether because a sharp blade is crucial for every cut. I moved to the back deck, again finding center and working my way out with the turf. Due to the width of the deck, I had to have some breaks. These are best hidden by cutting the break in the routed line itself and then butting my new turf piece up to it. Back up front, I continued working my way out from center with the turf. I could have just stuck the turf down here and tried to freehand it to the side panel edge, but I opted to make a template instead. Whatever floats your boat here on the install, I just wanted a clean, super tight fit on the side panel edging. The front deck and the back deck flats were now complete with turf. I continued to work my way through the boat one HydroTurf piece at a time. I turfed the battery storage step leading up to the front deck. I also turfed the cockpit, which was easier said than done. I then turfed the cockpit side steps. Keep in mind the battery step, the cockpit, and the cockpit side steps routed lines all had to line up and match the front and back deck's routed lines. So each piece was not only cut to size, but also cut with the black lines in specific orientation to where it would match with the other pieces throughout the boat. I wanted all the black lines to match front to back through decking, flooring, and steps. This is another reason line turf takes so much longer than solid colors or camouflage. But this kind of turf job is also what separates the men from the boys. Speaking of that, we doubled down on difficulty and upped the ante on detail by adding hydroturf to all the vertical walls and surfaces within the boat. This proved difficult and time consuming because none of these parts were square. They were all odd shapes with different changes and angles. Of course, I wanted to install these sections in solid pieces with the least amount of joints as possible to give the cleanest look. I wanted the finished product to look as if the turf job was all custom cut by a machine specifically for this boat and not by hand. To accomplish this, I used poster board to create accurate templates of the vertical walls. From there, I could transfer the shape to the hydroturf for cutout. For all the vertical surfaces, we use solid black hydroturf. No routed lines and no brushed finish, just flat black. I like how the black verticals make the deck angles and varying heights of steps really pop. The contrast ties in nicely to the overall design, and to me, the black turf almost looks like suede, giving yet another texture variance. With all the cockpit walls done, I carefully worked my way around the perimeter of the boat, turfing all the smaller side panels underneath the gunnels. To fully complete the turf job, I also did the front bow plate area as well as a small section killing into the transom. With the hydroturf finally behind me, I installed the rear pole light. I then began working on some custom covers for the bow access openings. I cut these out of aluminum and they would be removable should the customer need to get to any wiring or the trolling motor bolts. To mimic the angles on the bow and throughout the boat, these panels were cut in similar shape. I then wrapped them in 3M carbon fiber wrap before mounting them up. I went ahead and mounted the recessed foot pedal tray inside of the front hatch. Then I got busy removing the transom end caps so I could reinstall the factory rubber back inside of the channel inside of the gunnels. This was removed prior to paint. I moved on to the trolling motor install. The customer provided a Garmin Force Ultra. This motor is unique as it can run on 24 volt or 36 volt. We'd run on the 24 volt with the amped outdoors lithium batteries. This trolling motor also mates to any Garmin electronics, which we would also be using in this build. After mounting the unit up, I wired everything in using a battery quick connect before neatly routing and hiding all the wires and cables. I got the Garmin 93 SV installed offset on the bow, and it was mounted up on a ram mount. Again, all cables and wires neatly routed through the gunnel and hidden for a clean look. You can see the graph wired in to the dedicated fuse box in the front hatch. With all the hydroturf in, I could now mount all the lights within the cockpit and finally mount the deck lights on the gunnels. I decided to modify the back cap by cutting off the bottom. This will make it easier to route cables or lines through without hanging up or interference. I then installed the cockpit floor drains. As you can see, these line up perfectly within the routed turf lines and directly above the drain channels in the hull. This will easily allow water to drain from the cockpit through the floor and the foam into the channel and to the back of the boat. I mounted the clips that catch the boat buckle retractable rod straps to the front deck. Again, this is a really cool mod, and I'd like to implement these into a future build. Up front, I began working on the drain for the recessed foot pedal tray within the hatch lid. This required a lot of brainstorming. I'd take a 45-degree through hole fitting and mount it through the tray. I then attached a 3/4 inch live well hose and ran it downhill slightly and forward. I notched an oval in the hatch floor to allow the hose play when the lid opens and closes. This setup effectively drains the water from the recessed trolling motor foot pedal tray through the subfloor and into the hull channels and again to the back of the boat where the rear bilge pump is located. Off camera, I got the entire inside of the rod locker covered in hydroturf. I then worked on custom labels for the switch panel. After that, I had to address some wire connection issues on the trailer. Original connections weren't the greatest, so I made all new ones. Given the amount of work that went into this boat, I didn't want to send it out the door and down the road with potential wire issues from old wiring. Next, I had to address the trailer bunks. For starters, would you just look at that shag carpet? Also, I'd have to say this is the first time I've seen double-digit washers being utilized on a project. After a lot of sanding and stripping, I got new paint on the bunk brackets. I then made all new bunks wrapped with new carpet, new hardware as well, and then I got the Brigade logos on the side of the boat before remounting the bunks. With the bunks back on the trailer, it was almost complete. It was missing just one last thing, new fenders. My customer purchased these and had them shipped to me directly. Oh, and I did add some pieces of gator skins to a few parts of the trailer that are commonly stepped on. It was now time to mount the battery packs for the electric outboard. This actually worked out quite well. I started by skinning the back wall with some HydroTurf scraps to give some cushion and prevent the batteries from rubbing the wall. Then I simply made a framework using angled and tube aluminum to lock the batteries in place. The framework was screwed down. I then added a clasp to the tube frame and the back wall, allowing me to run a battery tie-down strap to secure the batteries. These batteries are E-Propulsion's first generation batteries, the Navy series. They are 48-volt lithium units wired in parallel. They have a built-in battery management system, or a BMS, that communicates with the E-Propulsion electric outboard. The back hatch is plenty big to store bigger or more batteries if needed, or a large gas tank, giving the customer plenty of outboard options later down the road. With the batteries in, the last thing left was to charge them up and get the boat ready for customer pickup. Thanks for hanging in there, guys. At this point, the boat is finally done. But before I show you the final product, there are a few questions I'd like to quickly answer for you. Number one, how long did it take? This project had well over 300 labor hours invested in it, and that is just my time on the boat and trailer, not including countless hours of research and design, ordering parts, or drive time to purchase materials. Number two, how much money did it cost? Well, I always say that's a loaded question. The customer already owned this boat and some of the parts we used in the build. Material costs has went up significantly since this project due to inflation. In respect of privacy, it has always been my policy to not disclose cost, because at the end of the day, this is my customer's personal financial decision and it's his business. Some of my videos get hundreds of thousands of views, and my customers just want awesome boats without having the world tell them how to or how not to spend their money. It's just a respect of privacy, and I hope you guys understand that. I show you everything I do to this boat in this video, and I'll leave links to all the parts used in the video description. With a little research, you can figure out a parts and material cost for a project similar to this one. And lastly, a final note. This project was a year and a half in the making. David, the boat owner, approached me about this boat build back in the winter of 2020, almost 6 months before I started Brigade Boats full time. David was actually the first customer to put down a boat build deposit. The footage in this video was filmed over the winter of 2021 to the spring of 2022. David has been fishing out of this boat and breaking necks at the local boat ramps for just over 3 months now. Guys, I have more man hours in this boat project than any before, and the same goes for editing this video. None of this will be possible without this channel and your support. If you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel. You can also like this video and share it with a friend. The more this channel grows, the more encouraged I am to continue putting in the time to film and edit these boat builds. If you like what you see here and you want to see some future boat projects, I really appreciate the love and support that I get. This is my passion, and I hope that it shows. Without further ado, I present to you the boat that I dubbed El Diablo, because the devil's in the details. he is. What up, cuz?
What's up, man?
This journey had finally come to an end. It was now time for the owner, David, to pick up his new boat. Biggest hatch in the state of Georgia.
Oh, man, I didn't see this.
That is clean.
Yeah.
They don't get no better than that.
That right there is what kills me, man.
A hatch inside of a hatch?
Yeah, but it's just so clean down in there. Good God.
Well, I bet I got pain putting all that sea deck down inside of there.
This whole boat was a pain. What do you think? We've been going back and forth for 1.5 years now on this.
Definitely turned out, I mean, way better than what I ever thought it would.
You were dancing and doing the shimmy off camera, but I can't ever get you on camera super excited, so.
That's true. I don't know what to say. I'm speechless.
We took our time going over all the ins and outs of the boat. This moment had been a long time coming, so it was nice to just sit back and let the details of the El Diablo marinate. Funny enough, I had recently made friends with some Jackson County Sheriff's deputies, and they were routinely driving by as David was picking up his boat. They spotted the new rig, hooked a Yui, and decided to swing through and check it out for themselves. Look who stopped by, guys.
The police. It looks, man, dude, this thing is gorgeous. Definitely a transformation from when I seen it till now. Wow.
Now we got to build you one.
Yeah, okay. I mean, your pockets are a little deeper than that, but...
I'd like to thank David for believing in me and trusting me to design and build his dream machine. Never-ending love and thanks to my wife and family for their support and understanding while I pursue my passion. And big thanks to you guys, the audience. Anyone who's ever subscribed, liked, shared, or even viewed, you are what makes this possible. I'd like to thank the following companies for their help and support while I chase my dreams. All my boys at Tiny Boat Nation Outdoors, E-Propulsion Electric Outboards, 400 Inc., Flowrite, ATF Hydrographics, Red Barn Graphics, Reed Oliver Photography, and everyone at 6 Cents Fishing and Waterland Sunglasses. Well, off to the next one, cousins.
You ain't no pit my ride?
Yeah, cool.
Oh, look at that thing. Oh, look at that. I got a hat. Oh, man. That thing beautiful.